So I would like to share with you some tips on recruiting partners for your projects. To begin, let's recall the actors that we introduced in the overview. We've got the research community, made up of colleges, universities, laboratories. By the way, that's national laboratories and private laboratories. Private enterprise, which is both startups and established firms. Education and training organizations, that's institutes of higher education, K-12 systems, museums, and private training organizations. Government, and for government, we want to include federal, state, and local agencies, tribal councils, and also special districts and commissions if they're appropriate. And civil society, which is foundations, NGOs, and unions, for example. And practitioners, and here I'm referring to service providers like accounting firms and consultants. So that's the scope of actors, but you have to recognize that you may not need all of them. You have to just select the partners whose values you need to define the project scope. Now, there's a PDF in the module about the typology for assessing the role of users. And you can see the way this typology works is there's 3 different activities. Each activity has various attributes, and depending on the project, the nature of the project, some of the attributes will be focused more towards the scientific values and some more towards the user values. So you'll need to select users depending on which areas, which attributes they're most necessary for. So I suggest you look at that typology and it'll give you a sense of how to do that. So let's just step through them very quickly. The research community. The first thing I want to tell you about the research community is you have to resist the temptation to favor people at your own institution. Now, you're going to get pressure from your deans and VPRs because they want to bring as much money to the institution as possible. The problem is this often encumbers too much of the budget. If you start at that point and your colleagues say, I need this amount of money and that amount of money, what you'll often find is there's not enough left for all of the other things that have to go on to create this user inspired system planning activity. And then what's going to happen is you're not going to win. And it turns out also that the people at your institution may not be fully committed to the UIR vision. Let's face it, we all go into this business of academia because we want to do what we want to do. And people have their own research agendas, and many of them are unwilling to modify that. So what I would suggest is that, yes, some people at your institution may be appropriate, but you should look nationally for the right people, folks who are open to the UIR model, willing to align their research to whatever the user-defined needs are, or they're already working along UIR lines. And then you have to recognize that people will want to partner with you for the EPSCoR set-asides. And also be aware that you should engage MSIs and community colleges as much as possible. Private enterprise is the second category. You have to be sensitive to seasonality of the particular industries you're dealing with. You have to schedule your planning meetings to avoid conflicts with busy periods. I learned this putting together a project in the food industry and not realizing that the time that we were doing things was a very, very busy time for certain people in the supply chain who had to do harvesting. And you want to seek diversity in firm size and position along the supply chain. They'll have different perspectives. And by the way, the large firms are important as potential funders of project activities. You want to be sure to engage ones there whose leaders are active in industry organizations and so forth. Education and training organizations. Consider organizations that are engaged in informal education. That's museums, online resources like organizations that manage wikis. So there's a lot of those out there. You should also consider training and certificate programs that are run by industry associations or even for-profit organizations like Culinary Institute of America would be an example of the latter. And then understand the unique institutional contours of community college training. They have to manage certificate programs. They have to interact with the private industry councils. They have to acquire equipment that is appropriate for the people who will be hiring their graduates. So, recognize when you partner with community colleges that they have a very unusual institutional contour among institutions of higher ed. Government. Now, be sure to select government organs that have both substantive and territorial responsibility. Match the geographic scale to the program requirements. If you're working on a regional engine, get the regional commissions that might be involved. And then make a special effort to identify commissions and special districts. I was working on a project on water resources, and it turned out that there's a trans-border boundary commission. And we were working in New Mexico, so that became relevant. Livestock trading across the border was also relevant. So, be aware that government is a very, very diverse category. Civil society, and here I'm talking about, foundations, unions, NGOs. Make a special effort to invite foundation program officers. These folks are always looking to see what's going on in new initiatives. They're naturally interested in learning and they want to attend these sorts of things. And beyond that, if they participate in the planning, they're potential funders of activities beyond what you may be able to include in the scope of the grant. If you're inviting union folks, be sensitive to union industry relations. What you might do is, especially in industries where they're very highly adversarial, you might ask each group to suggest representatives from the other side whom they trust, who they have worked with, or whom they are willing to work with. And then finally, identify NGOs that are working in this arena who can broadly represent civil society. And you'll find that there's certainly a number of those, a great deal of those. Practitioners are an interesting category. And by practitioners, I mean people that are providing services to the industry. So people in banking and finance organizations that serve your industry will be well aware of trends, sometimes before other folks recognize it, because they are dealing with a broad swath of actors. And accounting and consulting firms that are providing services, they know where the gaps in the competencies are. So, they are very, very important to include if you can. And what I would suggest to you is to recruit several, at least 3 leading practitioners from each category. I learned this in doing some dissertation research and found that what was very successful in San Diego was all of the practitioners were invited to participate. And the thing is, they do not want their competitors to acquire knowledge that they do not also gain. And so they were very cooperative. They served on panels together. They want to do this. So, this is a very, very important thing to do. Now, here's some general tips. One is that I would expect partners with resources to attend planning meetings at their own expense. This will help create commitment to continue their participation. And by the way, government is usually required to pay their own way. And what I would actually do is ask the partners with the resources to contribute to the meetings in some way. So for example, I might ask large firms to contribute to students who might attend the meeting and prepare white papers, or ask foundations to provide funding for some of the smaller startup firms or small firms that might not have the resources, and recognize that it will take several months to recruit a full complement of partners. And that's it. These are some tips that are both general tips and specific tips for recruiting the actors. The most important thing is to remember that first slide. You don't want to miss out on inviting partners that are necessary, whose values are highly important to defining the attributes. And so do spend some time looking at that typology PDF that's in the resources, and consider who you actually need to have at your meeting.